still remember the way the screen glowed in the dark that night. One short sentence, 5 words that burned themselves into my mind forever. "You'll die poor," she texted. At first I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so small-minded, so cruel, and yet so predictable. That's how she'd always been. Sharp tongue, colder heart, the kind of woman who smiled while twisting the knife. And still, some part of me loved her once. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I was sitting on the floor of my one-room apartment, the kind where the paint peels from the corners and the fridge hums louder than your thoughts. My last $27 sat in a cracked glass jar beside me. Rent was late. My phone bill was overdue. And now, the person I had trusted most wanted to make sure I knew I was finished. I stared at her message until the words blurred. Then I typed 3 letters back, "Okay," and set the phone face down. I told myself I was done caring. But inside something shifted. It wasn't anger yet. It was the quiet sting of humiliation, the kind that makes you promise yourself never again. You see, I wasn't born poor. I was born invisible. My father was a soldier who vanished overseas before I could remember his face. My mother worked 3 jobs, each one breaking her body a little more. She used to tell me, "Son, the world doesn't owe you anything, but it will pay attention if you make it bleed for what it took." I didn't understand what she meant until the night she died. After her funeral, I found a box under her bed filled with letters, military letters stamped with seals I didn't recognize. They were addressed to my mother from someone named Major Samuel D. Carter. The first few were love letters, but the last one, dated just weeks before my father's reported death, was different. It said only, "If anything happens to me, the Pentagon knows the truth about Project Echo." I didn't know what that meant. And honestly, I didn't care then. Grief makes you blind, so I drifted. Worked odd jobs, slept on couches, fell in love with a woman named Rachel who swore she didn't care that I was broke. She said she loved my heart, not my wallet. She told me she believed in destiny, and for a while I believed in her. But destiny, I learned, doesn't come knocking. It breaks the door down when you least expect it. The night she sent that text, Rachel had just walked out. She'd packed her things in silence, humming to herself while I tried to stop the bleeding between us. She said she needed stability. What she meant was money. She'd found someone richer. My former boss, a man who once told me, "You'll never make it. You think too small." As the door slammed, that humming stopped, and the silence she left behind was heavier than any debt. I sat there for hours, replaying everything, her laughter, the arguments, the empty promises. My mother's words echoed somewhere in the back of my skull. The world doesn't owe you anything. So when the phone rang the next morning, I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, Washington, D.C. I thought it was another scam call, but something, instinct maybe, made me swipe accept. "Mr. Carter?" A crisp female voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Agent Reeves with the Department of Defense. We've been trying to reach you regarding a classified matter concerning your late father." I froze. My heart kicked against my ribs. "My father? He died decades ago." "That's what the record says," she replied. "But we have reason to believe he's been misidentified. We need you to come to D.C. immediately and congratulations, Mr. Carter. You're the sole heir to a restricted fund valued at approximately $156 million. The room tilted. I actually laughed, a dry, disbelieving laugh that turned into a cough. "This a joke?" "No, sir. Check your email. You'll find your clearance documents there. A car will arrive in 3 hours." She hung up before I could ask anything else. I remember sitting there, staring at my cracked phone screen again. Same device that had just delivered my ruin, now delivering what sounded like salvation. I didn't move for a full minute. Then I opened my email expecting nothing, but there it was. Official seals, signatures, coordinates, and one subject line that made my blood run cold. Project Echo, authorized descendant access. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. My mind kept bouncing between Rachel's last text, "You'll die poor," and that email. Maybe fate has a dark sense of humor. 3 hours later, a black SUV pulled up outside my building. The driver was a man in a gray suit who introduced himself only as Mr. Cole. He handed me a passport with my photo but a different ID number, told me to get in, and we drove. No explanation. Just miles of silence and tinted windows reflecting a face I barely recognized anymore. When we landed in D.C., they took me through underground checkpoints. Retinal scans, fingerprints, military guards everywhere. My stomach churned as we entered a steel elevator that sank deep below ground. Finally, we stopped in front of a massive door marked Authorized Personnel Only, Project Echo. Inside was a conference room lined with American flags and digital screens showing old mission maps. At the head of the table sat a man with silver hair and an expression carved from stone. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I served with your father." He wasn't just a soldier. He was the architect of something extraordinary. "And it's time you learned the truth." He slid a file toward me. Inside were photos of my father, alive, older, standing beside world leaders. "Dated 2 years ago. He's alive?" I whispered. The man nodded slowly. "And he's been protecting something that now belongs to you." My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. Offshore accounts, patents, a defense contract fund labeled Echo Trust totaling $156 million USD. My father had built it using royalties from technologies he created in secret, technologies the Pentagon had used but never acknowledged. They told me he'd disappeared to keep me safe, that enemies wanted the blueprints and anyone connected to him was in danger. For a moment I couldn't speak. My entire life, every struggle, every humiliation, every sleepless night had been built on a lie. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd sacrificed everything to protect me. But then came the twist that gutted me. Agent Reeves handed me another file. Inside were recent bank transactions, withdrawals from my father's fund made under a false authorization. And the name attached to those transactions? Rachel Morgan. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. "No, that's impossible." She met my gaze evenly. "She used you, Mr. Carter. She knew exactly who you were. She was working with someone inside our department to gain access to your father's estate." That was the moment the world split in two. Everything went silent except for the pounding of my own heart. I wanted to scream, to break something, to call her, to demand why. But more than anything, I wanted to know how deep the betrayal ran. I asked them to let me see the security footage. They did, and there she was. Rachel in a military-grade lab, smiling that same sweet smile, holding a flash drive as she walked away with classified data. The woman who told me I'd die poor was the reason my father had to fake his death. And suddenly I understood what my mother had meant. The world doesn't owe you anything, but it will pay attention if you make it bleed for what it took. That was the night I stopped being a victim. They flew me back to my apartment that night, but I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, watching the city lights blink like dying stars through the window. Somewhere in those lights, Rachel was probably laughing with my former boss, holding a drink paid for with money she'd stolen from the man she once said she loved. Anger is strange. It doesn't always explode. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, filling every corner of you until you can't breathe. I wanted to destroy her, but another part of me wanted to understand. Why me? Why us? By dawn I'd made up my mind. If my father had lived in the shadows to protect the truth, then I'd walk into those same shadows to finish what he started. Agent Reeves met me again that morning. She handed me a folder containing every detail they had on Rachel's involvement. A shell company, a secret partner, encrypted accounts. At the center of it all, one signature I recognized instantly. Daniel Pierce, my ex-boss. The man who'd once told me I thought too small. The government couldn't touch him. He was too clean, too connected. But I wasn't bound by the same rules. I took the 156 million inheritance not as a reward but as a weapon. I moved half into charities in my mother's name, the rest into silent investments that would keep me invisible. Then I built a new identity, a consultant for defense innovation. The Pentagon believed it would help lure Pierce into the open. I believed it would help me heal. Both were wrong. 2 months later, I found myself at a gala in New York, dressed in a tuxedo I didn't feel worthy of. The chandelier light glittered against the champagne glasses, and then I saw her, Rachel, wearing a red dress that looked like sin and fire. She was laughing beside Pierce. My hands trembled so badly that I almost dropped my glass. She saw me. For a split second, her face went pale. Then she smiled, that same practiced curve of the lips. "You look different," she said when she finally walked over. "So do you," I replied. She tried to play innocent, told me it had all been a misunderstanding, that Pierce had manipulated her. I listened. I even smiled. But inside I was memorizing every lie. Later that night when the party ended, I followed Pierce to his car. He got in, rolled down the window and said, "Carter, didn't think you'd ever make it to this side of the table." I leaned close enough for him to smell the truth on my breath. "You're sitting at a table built on my father's blood." He laughed. "Your father built weapons. I just monetized them. You should thank me." He drove off, but not before dropping something small onto the street. A flash drive. Deliberate. A message. I picked it up. Inside were encrypted files titled Echo 2. When I decrypted them later, I realized they weren't just defense data. They were records, transactions proving the government itself had buried evidence of illegal testing. Pierce had been blackmailing them and Rachel had been his courier. If I released the files, the entire program would collapse, taking Pierce and half of Washington with it. But my father's name would be dragged through the same mud. For 3 days I didn't eat. I just sat staring at those files, hearing my mother's voice, Rachel's laughter, my father's ghost. On the 4th day I made my choice. I went public, but not with the files. Instead, I released my father's patents for free. To every university, every small engineer who wanted to build something that saved lives instead of taking them. I wrote an open letter. Let the truth build, not destroy. The internet erupted. The media called me the man who defied the Pentagon. Pierce's stock crashed overnight. Rachel disappeared from every public record. I heard she'd fled the country. I didn't chase her. Some ghosts deserve to stay ghosts. Months passed. The government quietly closed Project Echo. I donated most of the inheritance to rebuild hospitals for veterans, the kind my father would have wanted. And yet, late at night when the city fell silent, I'd still think of her. Not with hate anymore, with something colder, acceptance. She'd been my greatest heartbreak and my greatest teacher. Because in losing her, I'd learned the most brutal truth. People will betray you for money, for power, for fear, but they can't touch what's built inside your soul. One evening, as I was locking up the foundation office, Agent Reeves appeared again. "You did good work, Carter," she said. "Your father would be proud." I nodded, but I didn't feel proud. "He's still alive, isn't he?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed me an envelope. "He wanted you to have this." Inside was a single photograph, my father standing in front of a small cabin by the sea. On the back, in his handwriting, "The mission was never about war. It was about you. Forgive me." I drove to that coastline 3 days later. When I saw him, older, thinner, but alive, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. We just stood there, two broken men bound by blood and secrets. He told me the rest. How he'd faked his death after discovering Pierce's corruption. How he'd watched from afar while my mother raised me alone. How he'd sent the Pentagon to me the moment he knew he was dying for real this time. We talked until dawn. And when the sun rose, he took my hand and said, "Don't waste the inheritance proving them wrong. Use it proving yourself right." That was the last thing he ever said to me. He passed a month later. I buried him beside my mother, the two halves of my life finally whole. At the funeral, I stood alone. No suits, no agents, no reporters. Just me, the wind, and a folded flag. I whispered, "You were right, Dad. The world doesn't owe us anything." And then I added, "But I made it pay attention. People think revenge is about hurting those who hurt you. It's not. It's about reclaiming the part of yourself they tried to break." I still get letters sometimes from young men who watch the interview I gave about starting over. They tell me they're broke, heartbroken, ready to give up. I tell them what I learned the hard way. That poverty of the soul is worse than poverty of the wallet. That betrayal can either bury you or build you. That sometimes the text that says you'll die poor is the spark that reminds you how alive you are. If you're listening to this now, if you've lost everything, remember me. Remember that the same world that laughs at you today can kneel before your resilience tomorrow, because the truth isn't that I inherited $156 million. The truth is I inherited my father's will to fight. The rest was just numbers. And when people ask me what happened to Rachel, I tell them this. She taught me that love without loyalty is just a transaction waiting to fail. I thank her for leaving because her absence made space for my purpose. I no longer chase revenge. I chase peace. Sometimes late at night I still hear my phone buzz, and for a heartbeat I think it's her again. But when I look and see nothing, I smile. Because silence now is the sound of freedom. If my story means anything, it's this. No text, no betrayal, no loss can define you unless you let it. You are not the sum of what was taken from you. You are the sum of what you decide to build next. So build. Rise. And when they tell you you'll die poor, show them how rich a survivor can become.